All right, it's booting in there now.
You're good.
Okay.
Ready to go?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Greg Ruth. If you've picked up any type of art or illustration magazine, certainly in the last few years, I'm sure you've seen his work. He's done numerous posters with Mondo. Recently, the Twin Peaks series, which was phenomenal. Done some posters for Netflix, with the Marvel stuff. Getting a double feed going on here.
Yeah, let me see about turning off my email. Hopefully I don't lose you.
There we go.
Boom.
Turn the volume off on the YouTube channel. I think I've got it now.
Good, good. Okay, now you're back.
Along with Alan Williams, they pretty much run the pencil game as far as modern illustration goes. It's a great honor. He's a wonderful illustrator and storyteller, Mr. Greg Ruth. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, happy to be here.
So right now you're working on Meadowlark, which it'll be your second book with Ethan Hawke, right?
Yeah, that's right. We were originally set up while we were doing the book tour for Ende, which I had done a couple of years ago with Ethan. We were naturally heading towards doing a second volume because there was certainly a lot more to tell. And there was characters that were, we didn't get to flesh out for story reasons in the first volume that we really wanted to expand beyond. But while we were on the planes and the hotel rooms, we both kind of started playing around with a new kind of story notion that was revolving around kind of a father and son thing that that was kind of speaking to both of us. We both at the time had 14-year-old boys that were driving us nuts, and we kind of got waylaid into Meadowlark and developing that, and ended up submitting that as our second project rather than a sequel. It just kind of caught fire with us in a way. And in some ways as well, as terrifying and as risky an endeavor as Ende was, once we had done it and we had a second one to do, Meadowlark was scarier. And I think both of us really appreciate and enjoy the kind of creative juices that come from taking on projects that scare you. So Meadowlark just seemed more treacherous, more unknown, and kind of new territory. And we could not stop breaking that story across the aisle and the plane rides and in between all of the press stuff we were doing. It just kind of caught us on fire, and our editor loved it, and here we are, just about done actually.
Awesome, I'm so excited. Ende is a book that I've given several copies to friends and family over the last couple of years, and it's an example I always go to for people that get kind of confused sometimes when I tell them that, you know, I'm a comic book storyteller and illustrator, and they instantly think of you know, superheroes and stuff, and it's one of my first go-tos to show people, no, there's actually, you know, take your pick of
right.
You know.
Yeah, it's a much bigger world. It's definitely an American problem, the way that we see comics here. No one else in the world presumes keep books the minute you say comics. In fact,
yeah,
Elsewhere, it's almost never the first thing that's assumed going forward, but it is what it is. And I've been having to do that for the 30 years I've been working in comics, and it's still, an unknowable, understandable kind of medium to a lot of people. And a lot of people misunderstand it. So in a lot of ways, Inde was consciously an effort to, I have done, I did Conan and I did some Matrix comics, and very closely did a Batman series. So I'm not averse to superhero books, but I did always feel that it was important to do whatever I could to stand up for the other stuff. Like an overriding kind of obligation, I think, to do more with the medium. Again, as much as I do love reading superhero books, and those are the books, Watchmen and V for Vendetta and Dark Knight Returns, those are the ones that got me into comics back in the 80s in the first place. It just has become clear that there's a need to shout from a different mountaintop, especially now that comics have kind of grown into the larger book publishing world. You can, I think, whereas before you always had to kind of find a way to, if you wanted to tell a certain kind of story, it was always easier or better to clothe it in superheroes. But in the book publishing world, that presumption isn't there, and you can walk in and say, I want to do a graphic novel about Native Americans, or I have this great ghost story I want to do for kids, or I've got this kind of father and son crime kind of thing that I want to do. And there's no kind of, you don't need to sell why that would be a good choice because it's not a superhero book. They're just immediately ready to hear what you have to say. And in fact, the book publishing guys I've found have been much more inclined towards creator-owned books and really wanting to, there just isn't any presumptive genre to be in. And in fact, I think that they're inversely averse a little bit to superhero books, although publishing houses and divisions all have, their own lines that cover that stuff in manga especially, but it's not the leading edge that goes in, and it certainly isn't with our wonderful editor Gretchen Young over at Grand Central Books. It's just it's strange to not have to constantly apologize or explain yourself to people, even if they're not as familiar with the medium. So for me, Meadowlark is just another extension of like that. There's certain books that I've always wanted to do before I stopped making comics, and this was one of the last kind of pieces of that puzzle. I always loved crime stories. I really wanted to do a crime comic, and the only thing left that I haven't really tackled that I'd love to do is this ghost kind of horror comic that I've always wanted to do. But so Meadowlark kind of fills a niche for us.
I appreciate you keeping your foot in the comic storytelling waters, especially, for people on the outside. They don't realize that illustrators of your caliber rarely, you're doing this because you love it, obviously, as the storytelling medium, and it shows. And as somebody, I'm as a D-list illustrator myself, I know how hard the work is, and
it's so bad. It is such a terrible medium to work in.
It is. It's a grind. It is an absolute grind. But when you're at the end of it, it kind of all goes away,
Well, yeah, you always forget how bad it was to get to freedom once you're free. But it's like, I always liken it to a kind of addiction. There's just no viable reason anybody in their right mind would necessarily do this. I mean, it's years and years of work. I think it took me about 10 years, start to finish, to do The Lost Boy. I think Inde was 6 years with Ethan and I working on that. This has been quicker, but it's still 3-4 years. And it's just, it's thousands of drawings. And this has been a hard book, especially because in the last couple of years, I have done a lot more book and film work, and certainly poster work that has just been so fun, but also so, the turnover is very quick, month to month, sometimes even week to week, there's just a new project. And there's been so
Yeah.
much to do. And I have such a bumblebee brain that I love kind of juggling a bunch of different stuff. It's really fed into that. And then when you get into the kind of required monogamy of comics, where you're basically not experimenting anymore, you can't, once you set your course, you've got to consistently get there. You can experiment, you can still, there's room to run, and the fences of the kind of genre bring some freedom, but your art can't, you can't suddenly decide, like, I want to play with crayons. You can't switch things up in a way that doesn't, that if it's not part of the narrative that you're telling in some purposeful way, is just a distraction and makes for bad comics. So it's been really frustrating in a lot of ways, and hard to just continue every day to draw 20 or 30, panels and just keep going and keep going page after page when I get an idea for something, or even worse, when like a really, just a terrific opportunity comes along that I have to say no to because I've got to continue with this until it gets done. And it is a grind. It is a deep, dark forest. You have to kind of hack your way through until the end. But once you're done, when you hold that book, there really is just nothing that has that weight. There's nothing that holds that kind of center of gravity. And from it, so much comes and revolves around it. It's always worthwhile at the end. But right now, when I'm in the absolute final deep depths of it, it feels like you're at the bottom of a well never going to climb out of. So it's day by day. You set simple goals and you meet them. I just got to get to these next 10 pages, and then when you're done, you lie to yourself and say, okay, now I'm going to get to the next 10 pages. You just kind of keep eating the elephant one fork full at a time, I guess. And, I don't think there's any other way to it. There's a lot of lessons for doing other work and patience in that.
That's, over the last 20 years, I've been bouncing around the comic gutters. That's the biggest lesson I've learned consistently from everyone I've talked to, is really just stick with it,
Yeah. It's what breaks people. I'm sure you have a lot of friends or people you run into who are so excited. Comics are such an alluring medium. It is. Even Ethan is kind of mesmerized by them because you get to be everything. You get to be a director, a casting director. You have an infinite special effects budget. There's no, you've worked with an editor and they pretty much let us run. So we get to craft these fully realized narratives in picture form without all of the kind of the stranglehold of executives or committee meetings, or a lot of the stuff that he's certainly more used to when he's getting a film in through set, or dealing with having to argue with producers or a studio or a TV network. It's just, you're so totally free to kind of carve your way. It is such a playground. And I know for me, I've always known that, but I think he's been kind of mesmerized and really excited by never having had that kind of full-on experience, except the closest to would be the most low budget, nickel and dime, low budget kind of small film, in order to have that kind of freedom on a set. But I know a lot of illustrator friends of mine, a lot of painters, they see it and they get mesmerized by the same kind of magic of it. And I think the first mistake everybody makes is they always go in with these big grand ideas. I know my first comics project was ludicrously big. I had 10 volumes mapped out. Each volume was going to be 300 pages. It was an absurd thing to do. And what you really do is do 5 pages, find a paragraph out of a novel you like and illustrate it, to just do little bits and start to get a sense of what it is. And most people, even veteran illustrators and painters I know, will really go into it. They'll go in hard. They'll have a big grand story to do. They'll get about 15, 20 pages in, and then that's where I think, the true believers and the kind of weekend warriors kind of separate. And because almost everybody stops then. You lose the thread of it, you get distracted by something else, and when you come back to it, maybe it's cool and you're not so into it anymore. And then when you look at it and you look what you have to do, it's intimidating and it scares you away by being daunting. I think it's like you got to kind of be a hound dog with your nose on the ground, and you just chase your prey until you get it, and you just don't stop. There's really no other way to do it. But I mean, every time I'm giving a lecture or a talk, and I ask people like who's interested in comics, and people raise their hands, and do you like to make comics? Are you interested in making comics? And there's a lot of people that want to do it. And the first thing I always say is, don't do it. Stay away. I say it's a terrible medium, and I want you to be good and happy and safe. You won't make any money doing it. It's awful. But no one who is seriously going to do it anyway will ever listen to that, nor should they. And hopefully the people that take that seriously avoid the heartache of losing all the time for it, because even if you get it done, and you're doing it, I mean, I've done 6 or 7 graphic novels now. When you start breaking down your hourly rate in terms of executing a comic, I was at a dinner with a bunch of guys at Comic-Con about 15 years ago, and we were all trying to figure out what we made per hour drawing the comics.
Big mistake.
It was terrible. It was hilarious. I think Sergio Aragonis was the only one that was able to really claim a legitimate profit margin, because that guy is so damn fast. But I think I was in the good margin, in the rare few that was above the negative amount. I think most people had like negative $20 an hour or negative. I calculated 15 cents an hour. This is not, you're not going to buy a Lamborghini in this medium at all. It's really madness to chase it. But
I was 10 years old when Image, started.
Right.
And books were selling millions of copies, and Jim Lee's buying a Lamborghini, and
right. You used to be able to do a Batman book and buy a house.
Right. And so I was drawing before I could talk. I was just always going to draw comics one way or the other, and hitting that point of preteen age and thinking like, wow, I'm really going to do this. It's going to be a job where I can make, plenty of money, and just a few years later, the entire, market drops out and everything changes. And it's been that way, for the last 20 years. It's every few years, the whole thing shifts. And right now we're seeing, obviously, the entire distribution system come to a grinding halt.
Yeah, everything.
There's a lot of questions right now about the future of our industry, but
yeah, I think there are, and I too, I think I got inspired back in the late 80s when all those new wave books were coming out, and so by the time I literally showed up to the party, it was that stage of the comics party where there's just like 3 people left, and 2 of them are passed out on the couch, and the beer all over the floor, and there's dead cigarettes everywhere, and there's no food, and the cooler's empty. Like, it was just a little late. And a lot of the guys that I know and share the same agent with and have gotten to know over the years were the heroes that brought me into it. Dave McKean and Jay Muth and Kent Williams. It was like it's been such a privilege to get to know them so well, and they were the ones that brought me in, but I did not get the carnival ride that they enjoyed for that kind of 10-year golden age between 87 and 98, before things really kind of cratered for the industry. But I would say that it's important to separate the medium from the comics industry. In the comics industry, the direct market and the comic shops has been one of the most self-immolating businesses I've ever witnessed in my life. There is no opportunity to shoot themselves in the face that they don't climb over each other to take and pull the trigger as many times as they can, whether it's the crazy foil variant thing, whether it's it's just, there's just so, it is so poorly run. It has been so exclusive to so many people, to women, to people of different races. It is just, it has been painful and hard to kind of navigate for a long time. So when book companies started picking up and getting really excited about the medium of comics and graphic novels, I was first to jump off the lifeboat and swim for that island. That has been such a boon. And it's been, and coming, and now being in that position, I've been making books there. My last 3 graphic novels were solely through book publishing places for the last 20 years. I've been in that. It is so much better. So much better. There's so many more people. The marketing is so much more adult and serious. It is not just within these tiny, tiny little shops that are now almost all gone anyway.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's become, there is such a self-made ghetto of comics. And I kind of love its kind of seedy underbelly character to a certain degree, but there's time to grow up. And I was so excited to see it really grow. And you started seeing people winning national book awards for graphic novels. And I think Raina Telgemeier was the first graphic novel to beat out novels on the New York Times bestseller list. Like we're really starting to claim real territory with a wider audience. And the stories that are winning these things are not at all, they're not even connected to each other, whether it's the wonderful graphic novel about the Boer War, or Raina's autobiographical stuff, or One Lazy Summer. There's all these blankets. There's just all these different types of stories that are the ones that are really rising up. And it makes you, I think it broadcasts that this is a really vibrant, multi-genre, alive, anything goes kind of medium. And you can walk in with some story about falling down and knocking your teeth out and how to deal with that in junior high school and build a career off of that. And you could never do that in a million years. You might be able to make a zine out of this, or find a little indie shop that'll do it for you back in the day, but you could never build and have a vibrant and successful career doing those kind of books. So as much as I think that I think Diamond's collapse is going to put a lot of people out of work, and it's going to create a lot of disruption in a market that is already suffering so much. And I lament all of the innocent babies getting thrown out with that bathwater. I'm having a really hard time seeing, finding a lot of empathy for Diamond's collapse, because it's had such a chokehold and a monopoly on this medium that has choked out its own growth, that has been made it very hard to do independent books. I mean, my first graphic novel that I ever did for Caliber Comics, which has been gone for years, back in '93, it was miserably difficult to get that into stores. It was such a struggle because it was kind of a thriller set in a mental hospital. They didn't know where to put it. Stores would shove it in the back area and the independent areas next to 8-Ball or some Chris Ware thing that they also didn't know what to do with. It's just that for a long time in that period, we were the absolute gutter of the sub gutter of the gutter that everybody was living in. And it was being able to get out from under that and see that from a distance. I haven't for a moment wished for a return to that place.
Yeah.
And I've certainly been very excited. I think for the first time in a long time, I've been really, really excited for the medium of comics and for just the work that's being done and the work that we're all doing and the people that I've gotten to know that are making them now. I don't think that there's been a better time for comics in our history as there is right now. And I know that sounds totally counterintuitive. And I know that to guys that are doing superhero comics, it is an apocalypse call, but I think it's true. I think we're in a better place than we were and have been in a very long time. And change is coming, and it's right now it's hitting us really hard, and it's going to wipe a lot of old stuff out. But I'm really excited for what's going to fill in the empty spaces, because there's a lot to do there. There's a lot of, it's definitely a young person's medium. There's a reason why a lot of us stop at this age. It is just when you got kids and work and mortgages, it is not necessarily a healthy playground to run around in. I know why, but Dave McKean still can't stop making them. Like, there is that kind of addict's impulse. Jay Muth just did one from a Stanislaw Lem story that came out last year. And I know Kent still thinks about it. We're all still hooked on it. But
yeah, I'm going to talk to George tomorrow night about, those guys and, similar things.
I mean, I used to sit with him in his apartment in Brooklyn. I mean, when I was just before I did my first book, and I found out that he lived in my neighborhood, he graciously let me in, and it was such an inspiration to hang out with George Pratt.
He said to tell you hi, by the way.
Oh, good. Well, all right, back. George was a huge cornerstone for me, because he was the first guy that I physically knew that was making comics. And we would talk about them a lot. And even if he was doing a Batman book at the time, I think he was just doing his Harvest Breed book. Enemy Ace was just in the hardbook, kind of prestige format times at that moment. He was working on Blind Boy and really wanting to do, even in a Batman book, infusing different stuff into it. His Wolverine Natsuki book had a lot more going on, and it kind of gave him a playground to do a lot of the samurai Japanese stuff that he and I both loved. And so he made me realize that there's a lot more to do and a lot more to see. And he's also of those guys that are painter, comics artists that do full art paintings, like really, really high end,
right,
legit painting. And that was, for someone who wasn't coming up with an R. Crumb kind of background, or a Charles Schultz origin, or on the other side, a Jack Kirby, kind of roots. These guys that were really coming out in the 80s and 90s seemed like a real breath of fresh air and real exciting territory.
I kind of considered them to be kind of like the Studio 2.0.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There was, and they did know each other with Jeff Jones, and they would all spend time with each other. Yeah. It was definitely a real, and things were different. I'm in Western Mass now. We used to have a big comics community down in Northampton. The Comics Art Museum was there, and Dennis Kitchen had his place there, and the Ninja Turtle guys had opened up all their new publishing, and Tundra was here. So you had a lot of really crazy new artful books kind of coming in and out of this area. There was a moment when everybody was kind of around. You get those kind of idyllic pictures of like Gertrude Stein and Picasso and Braque all sitting around a coffee shop someplace and knowing each other and talking and sharing their work. And there was that moment for that. I, again, missed it. I wasn't there. The shop had closed up by that time, and they'd all scattered to the winds. But over time, I've gotten to know all of them, and it's just been a great joy to have them, to be in their company professionally. It's beyond my wildest dreams in that way. But so you get that in other ways and in different ways. But it's just a different time, and I do love seeing how everybody's changing and adapting to these new mediums. And I do still look back onto that period of the 80s and 90s. And an old screenwriter buddy of mine who got me into comics, and I just still wistfully idealize that period. I mean, we were going to those shops, direct sales, comic book shops literally had just started to open for the first time. They were largely, the one we loved the most was, it looked like they had just squatted in an empty storefront. I mean, there was nothing fancy about it, but every Wednesday it was like church. I mean, you were talking like a new issue of Watchmen would come out, a Dark Knight would come out, there'd be a new Area 88, or there'd be some new Sandman, or Hellblazer was starting. Like, it was, Swamp Thing was just getting going. I mean, it was just all of these like kind of totemic pillars of mainstream American comics were all coming out on a weekly basis back then. It was bonkers and it was incredible. I couldn't read enough and I couldn't get enough of them. And we would drive over there in Houston and get our bags. And then literally, like, there was no question that both of us were like, all right, great, I'll see you later. We're going home, drop me off. And we would go in and just sit down and read through what we had just picked up. I looked forward to Wednesdays like you wouldn't believe, like Christmas every week back then. I do miss that. It's not like that now, I think. And I think that is something that I miss seeing, having around, and having other people, younger people, certainly have that experience. That was a real joy. But there's other places.
I'm not even sure. I even had the fortunate least of having like Walden Books, and
oh yeah,
even up to the late '90s, places like Walmart and stuff still had comic racks.
Spinner racks. Oh, I love the spinner racks.
So my mom would go to the grocery store or go to the mall or whatever, and I would just be on that spinner rack the whole entire time.
Oh yeah, that was a lifesaver. I love those like little. You got 3 comics for $1, and you didn't know what you were getting. You could
the random.
This is why I really didn't get into it when I was a kid, because that was the only way to get comics we had these local convenience stores, early version convenience stores in the 70s and 80s in Texas called U-Totems, and they would have like a little newsstand area, and they would have a spinner rack up there. And that was the only way to get comics. But it was a Christmas miracle that you would ever be able to pair a Spider-Man book with another Spider-Man book that was just the next issue. You were all screwed. You always got some weird Sergeant Rock thrown in there, and then some Doctor Strange story, or maybe a Spider-Man that was on the cover that you got, but then you wouldn't get something else. And it was just a grab bag, but there was no possible follow through of narrative. I couldn't chase anything. And if I wanted to, I didn't know how to do it. Certainly back then, it just didn't grab me, but so better now, I think.
Yeah. Let me get into process briefly. I don't know, there's probably, at least there will be some process hounds tuning in at some point.
Yep.
On a project like obviously there's a vast amount of reference that goes into a project like that. How much did Ethan already have a lot when he brought the story to the table, or is it something you guys really went back and forth on?
Yeah, both. I think when we first met, he had a monstrously long, like 300-page screenplay that he'd written, exhaustively researched. He had worked with another guy, Charles Gaines, for a long time on it. I think that they'd done a terrific amount of research. There just is a lot of material, particularly about the Apaches, because there were interviews. There were actual live interviews conducted, funded by the government, with Geronimo while he was still alive. So there was a lot of data, and the Apache Wars were a particularly kind of pop culture moment. They were a real vibrant kind of reported insurgency back then. So there's just a lot of material to get to, and you're talking about a lot of history for people that is in oral history. So a lot of the smaller tribes, you really have to dig deep and hard to even find it if they're willing to share it. So there were a lot of unusual hurdles to telling that kind of a story, as opposed to Meadowlark, which is almost entirely rooted in our own lives now, and then our childhoods in Texas, which is easy. I mean, we can dive through, finding out what we remembered in the 1980s and Huntsville, Texas. That's an easy get for us. Ende took a lot of work, and it needed to have a lot of research as well, because the point of Ende was to try to, as a couple of white dudes, not do the thing that just about everybody else had done in terms of appropriating their culture and exploiting them or cartooning them, or just kind of furthering the abuse and the kind of dismissiveness and the delegitimization that's happened with them for so long, we didn't want to be apologists for it. We just wanted to do it right. And that meant being as honest and straightforward and deeply researched as possible. We took a trip out to the kind of Apache territories down and around New Mexico and Arizona, and just to walk in the places, to see the landscape, to not get lured in by a lot of the mistakes that people make when they talk about tribes in that region that are always existing solely in these kind of John Ford desert mesa areas. Ojo Caliente, where the Apaches really wanted to finally settle and live, which was their home, it looks like Vermont. I mean, it's verdant, it's water filled, there's lakes and trees and grass. It's a very different kind of look. And there was a lot of surprises like that along the way with regards to upending our lifelong sense of understanding of them. I mean, we both came from Texas. We both got really excited we heard lots of stories about the Apaches and the Comanches, which were regional to our part of the country. So what we grew up learning, we realized was a lot of horseshit and racist bullshit, really, to be perfectly honest. And it felt like an ability to kind of reclaim and do right by what was so wrong for so long, to really kind of do it well. And that meant talking with a lot of tribal historians and doing a lot of our own research. And I think when he had that script and we realized that it wouldn't function as a story to tell that kind of history lesson or to tell a straight up biography of Geronimo, but we had to basically take that script and literally throw it into 1,000 different pieces and then just start figuring out what a new story would be from it, how to do it, how to tell it so that it's historically accurate, but that it bends to the needs of the storytelling also at the same time. It was one of the most complicated and fraught and frightening things I think either of us had ever done, because you're walking a tightrope that so many people of our ilk had walked before and had almost all failed left and right. There was just bodies everywhere walking over this thing, and there was no reason for us to make it to the other side successfully. I think we both still every once in a while kind of sit back and remark at how we managed to pull it off. It is such a difficult thing, but there's such a simple path through it. And the kind of love for the medium and the respect and telling a human story is just, I mean, the great revelation of Inde was that we were telling a story about the Apaches as if they were people. I mean, that was it. That's all you had.
Right.
That's how bad things are with how we see natives. That just telling a human story about people who were funny and had families and got drunk and fought with their wives and their husbands and had complicated relationships with their daughters or their son. It's just all, just seeing it through that lens was a revolution for it, and it opened up everything for us. So there was a lot of momentum in that history once seen through that lens. It just suddenly it put electricity through everything.
Oh, it's a wonderful achievement. I'm part Hunkpapa Sioux myself, and I'm actually not too far away from Standing Rock right now.
Oh.
And I was at Standing Rock when that was all taking place as well.
Pipeline.
I've grown up largely surrounded by, if not in, Native culture, and it was really impactful to me. And it's been very impactful to the Native people that I've shared it with. They've all really, really, really appreciated it.
Yeah, it's an important thing to do. I mean, right now I'm trying to figure out, I mean, one of the things that's frustrating me about being still obligated to Meadowlark is that I really want to do some stuff to help support the Mashpee Wampanoag community that has just been kind of delisted by the Trump administration. The government is just basically deciding Well, if we just decide to remove our recognition of them as legitimate tribe, their land now can be sold, and we can have our friends put their casinos on it instead of the natives having a viable business for themselves. So, and this is the first of what it seems to be a program to go through and kind of complete the horrific fourth and fifth stage of the genocide by stealing and robbing them once again of their land for financial gain. It is madness to think that that's something that we still would even consider doing, or that we'd be allowed to do. But it's an easy thing to do when you don't talk about them as people anymore. When most people, when you speak about any local native tribe, a lot of the non-natives didn't even know they still existed. I didn't know you were still alive. You know, like it's just when people aren't people anymore and they don't exist anymore, their stuff can easily become your stuff. And it is heartbreaking to see that terrible racist attitude resurface again. And for no good reason. It's not like there aren't other areas that anyone can make money from. This is it. It is the worst kind of grave robbing that I can imagine. But here we are. I mean, the wheels come around again. You know. The Keystone Pipeline is another absolute example of that. It is just different clothing for the same thing that we've been doing to natives since we came here. You know, on just a different, much more toxic and an industrial scale. It's a hard thing to witness. So it's definitely important to stand up, be aware, talk, and share. And I think that for us, Ende was simply an attempt to try to make a conversation. And there's a million other. I mean, God, if I had a million years and an infinite budget, my dream would be to have every tribals. The stories that we would hear from, you know, we're local to Mohawk Indian. The Mohawk Indian friend would tell me these stories of their history and even of their recent history in the 1960s, and they're extraordinary tales that no one knows. I would love to see 1,000 different people do 1,000 different graphic novels about them. There's no greater resource for American storytelling, and yet it's just this giant gold nugget that everybody steps over on the way to Starbucks, and it's a little heartbreaking to see that.
It is. I've been slowly kind of building a piece based around my Standing Rock experiences.
Good.
But there's a lot to unpack there that continues to kind of unravel as a glorious ribbon through my life. You know that.
And it's hard. I think it's hard within, even on the reservation, to tell your stories. There's such a kind of complexity within the community, even deep within the heart, to be able to speak to one's own history in that way without the kind of gatekeepers of that history who are actively protectionist of that lore. It's something that we were met with a lot when meeting other members of different tribes, was the lack of freedom to speak to their own stories publicly in the same way that you guys, being outsiders, there's much more treachery and potential danger there, but there's a lot more license there as well, because you're unbound by the obligations to the history since they're not your people. There's a certain extent of, and that's common in a lot of different areas. Sometimes having someone outside of the community can speak to it by seeing it as a whole thing from a removed perspective helps. And to be of kind of both worlds, to be kind of blended as well, I think adds even another layer of agency, but also that same complexity that can be tricky to juggle, I think.
Right. But the value in the successful combining of those perspectives, is certainly worth the risk, when it's done with heart and intention,
if you can pull it off, there's nothing more worth it, I think. And I think both of us feel like whatever happens after having, it is certainly, of all the books that I love that I've done, and I love them all like children, I'm proud of Ende in ways that I don't think I can be of anything else to a certain degree. I love the book that we're doing now. We're both so excited about it. We're both so excited, thrilled to be doing it. It feels so cathartic for us as fathers to be able to tell this story. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily have the inherent cultural value or the necessary need that Ende did. We're really grateful for it. And I don't think the story of Ende and its moving into different mediums is over either. And so we'd really like to see it go further and kind of move on. And we're looking into some of those possibilities right now.
Awesome. So Meadowlark, could we expect that in the fall, if everything starts to fall back to?
No, book companies, one of the things that is both a blessing and a boon and a curse of the book companies is they're on a yearly cycle. So if you're working stuff with a comics publisher, like IDW or Image or DC or Marvel or whatever, it's a month-to-month thing. There's a real great gratification. I would draw a Conan book, and then in a couple of months, I can go buy it.
Yeah, right.
The turnaround is so quick. It's different with the book. They're on a year cycle. So we'll turn in Meadowlark this spring. And then we'll have a whole year before it'll come out next year around this time. Okay. Where we'll work on edits. The book company will start working on its marketing. It's just a big, giant kind of juggernaut that.
Gotcha.
So it'll be, I think it's due late spring, early summer 2021. And hopefully we'll be free of all of this thing, which is so many great books have come out in the last couple of weeks, just like lead balloons, because their entire marketing has vanished. There's no book tours. There's no conventions. Oh my God. I mean, it's so hopefully we'll be on the other side of this crazy pandemic and in a better place.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully this is the only Wonder What-a-con I have to do. So
I know, it's weird. I'm so glad you're doing it, and I'm so glad to see that other folks are doing it. I know that my friends over at Spectrum and Lauren Pinapinto and Mark Sheff and Dan DeSantos managed to pull off.
Last weekend was the award show, and I was supposed to be there in Kansas City, a few weeks back. So
heartbreaking, but they did a wonderful job with kind of putting it together. It was hilarious and terrific. I love that spirit, and that's I think that's where there's hope for it. I think a lot of these cons are not necessarily going to be able to come back. I'm stunned that San Diego has not made it all, even right now, when so many of those vendors, so many of those publishers, and so many of those artists could really use their booth fees back. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of dollars worth of buy-in to do that show. They really need that right now. That I really wish San Diego would hurry up and do the right thing. I cannot imagine that we're going to be past peak by the time it rolls around. And even if we're just on the other side of things just starting to cool, given the calendar, who in the world is going to go to it?
Yeah, it's still too much of a hotbed either way.
It is astonishing to me, given how the others have really quickly. I know South by, I was involved doing some work for South by Southwest, and I just remember when they called it, there was a lot of people really, I mean, it is a disaster for so many people. It has been such an earthquake for a lot of the local businesses, for the local economy, and for people with new film projects. I was doing poster work for the comedy showcase, all those young comedians that this is where they can get their start.
Right.
It was so bad in a lot of ways, and a lot of people really yelled and screamed and kind of mocked them for being hyper reactionary. But looking back now, how absolutely correct it was to do, however painful it was.
Yeah.
to do that. Of course. Why? Who in God's name would have continued? I mean, that would have been doing that show would have responded in the spread of this virus on an astronomical scale on a citywide level. It would have been a giant spread party for this thing. So I am heartbroken by the cost that this is coming to so many folks and so many artists that I know that make their living at these shows. Like this is, I know so many people for whom that these cons are, they're relied upon go-to for the baseline of their income, and they don't know they're fast shifting towards online shops for the websites, and it's not the same. It's just not the kind of same experience or the same customer base. It takes a long time to grow an online community. It kicked the legs out of a lot of people, but at the same time, it's better than being responsible for someone's illness
Right.
or hospitalization as a result. I mean, we have to reorient to a certain degree. So it'll be different on the other side of this, that's for sure.
It will, but we're doing it. We're going to make it through. And
I agree.
And I think we're both in agreement that regardless of what happens, great art and great comics are here to stay.
Oh, no doubt.
So next year when Metal Arc hits, I'd love to have you and Ethan on to talk about that.
Sure.
And until then, stay safe and thank you very, very, very much.
Great.
Wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Good luck out there. Stay clean and safe. And I hope everybody is doing well and getting through. And, we'll see you there.
All right. Take care. I'll be back on at 6 o'clock with Dwight Clark from Sidebar Nation. And you all have a great afternoon. Thank you, Greg.
Bye. See ya.